Hey everyone, it's Lindsay Rhodes, and I've got a new podcast, the NFL Road Show. Fun and kind of nerdy conversation about the NFL every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I've got some amazing guests that are joining me. I'll be breaking the huddle with the top stories, previewing games. We'll get you set for the weekend fantasy with our Fantasy Friday episodes, and we'll answer some of your questions as well. So subscribe to the NFL Road Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you once more without my co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, once again, though, excited to continue our team look-ahead train. We're releasing this on a Sunday because we just want to get as many teams out as possible before the start of the season, and then we'll let the last few trickle out probably sometime before the middle of January is out. We'll have those finished because we will have to gear more towards league-wide coverage once there's meaningful basketball. But, hey, we have like 21 or 22 of the team previews being pumped out in a span of just a couple weeks. I think that's pretty good. Today, we're talking about James Harden, and then the Orlando Magic with Keith Smith. He covers the NBA all over the place. He's at Yahoo Sports, Real GM, Celtics blog, and host of the Front Office Show. Follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA if you're not already. After him, we get to the Charlotte Hornets with Konata Edwards. He is the co-host of the Locked On Hornets podcast and also a writer for Dime Up Rocks. Had a great conversation with both of them. Please make sure that you're checking it out. Before we get started, though, just my normal reminder to please subscribe to this podcast if you've not already. Download the episodes, recommend us, help us retweet promos, get the word out. This podcast is underrated and awesome. Take people's phones, subscribe them to this podcast. They'll thank you later, maybe. And finally, whether you use iTunes or not, please head over to iTunes somehow, some way on someone else's phone. Search Hardwood Knocks. Throw us that 5-star rating and write a review. Those are the second best way to really help us out after, one, subscribing and downloading these episodes. Without further delay, though, let's talk some James Harden trade information and Orlando Magic with Keith Smith. And then let's talk Charlotte Hornets with Konata Edwards. Konata, welcome back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast. First and foremost, congratulations on the Hornets not ending up with Obi Toppin, whom I trolled you about for a very long time after we last talked a few months back. So kudos there, ending up with LaMelo Ball instead. And equally important, though, how are you doing?
Man, everything's cool in the gang, man. We're recording this. I get to talk basketball, Dan. And despite that, we have a Howard Cosell Muhammad Ali relationship, Dan. So therefore, like whenever we have these talks, they end up being better than people seem to expect from either one of us, and I don't understand why. But these are always fun. These are great, and so I'm looking forward to talking basketball, man. Definitely.
Yeah, look, the Hornets had a super interesting offseason, and I was probably most intrigued by their draft. Obviously, I think a lot of people thought that they were going to just end up with James Wiseman as a third pick. That was the assumption for so long, and then all of a sudden it ends up being LaMelo. So just even before having your impressions of him and just what you've thought about his game so far, I know there's been very little preseason basketball, but still, were you at all surprised that he was still there at number 3? Was that the guy that you identified that you were hoping that would actually fall to Charlotte if they were staying at number 3?
Yeah, absolutely. He was the guy. For me, he was the guy that you hoped. I was hoping that Minnesota was going to overthink it and say, we already have a D'Angelo Russell. Why put him further off ball? Mm-hmm. I'm glad they overthought it. I am supremely happy that Golden State overthought it because I thought that James Wiseman would absolutely be the pick. I'm legitimately surprised. I thought LaMelo was the best guy in the class because he's a guy that at 6'7", 6'8", can get to the rim whenever he wants, and as we're seeing now, can make things easier for other people. He was the guy I wanted, and if it wasn't going to be him, it was going to be someone like Onyeka Okongwu. And unfortunately for him, and why he ended up sliding a little bit further than I expected him to, he ended up hurting himself again, working out for the draft, and now he's not expected back anytime soon. But LaMelo was the guy. LaMelo always was the guy for me.
I did find it interesting that I think it was the Charlotte Observer had the report that he just wasn't interviewing well, and I was like, well, this just seems like there might be a certain team in Charlotte that's kind of hoping that he gets to number 3 at that point. But what have been your impressions so far of LaMelo's game? I think he's, from what little I've been on mostly a preseason basketball blackout as we record this because I don't want it to influence a project I'm working on right now. But from what I've seen of him, like the passing is clearly transcendent. But I'm wondering what else you've noticed about his game, what you like, what your actual concern is for him going into his rookie season. And my actual biggest question, and I'm assuming the answer is yes, but is he going to have like the leeway to really explore himself and plumb the depth of both his skill sets and just make a bunch of mistakes and play through it?
The answer to that last question absolutely is yes. My impressions of him, he's been better. He's been a better passer than advertised because we've always heard about these guys that are just these awesome playmakers, and they end up doing some pass that just it's kind of like he ends up making those passes that you don't necessarily see. Like they're advanced chess moves. They're the move prior to the move that takes the rook. That's what he's doing right now. Or sometimes he just takes the rook. The biggest beneficiary of a guy like that has been Miles Bridges. And Miles Bridges looked a lot better with LaMelo Ball. There's a lot of guys that have looked a lot better with LaMelo Ball. And Dan, since you haven't seen too much of the preseason, I can tell you this and you can appreciate this because you've seen enough basketball to know. This man has made Bismack Biyombo a he makes him look like a qualified finisher in the post. That's how good he's been.
So Orlando's about to give him $64 million next summer is what you're saying.
Exactly. Like, the only thing that you worry about with a guy like LaMelo Ball is that you wonder if the shot selection, which has been dicey at times, is going to take over. That's the only thing I actually kind of worry about. But I don't worry about the outside shot because the Orlando game kind of I was going to, but then he starts hitting corner threes and then he starts getting into a rhythm and then he goes from there. I really do like his game. I don't think he's going to be this massive bust. At minimum, he's what Sean Livingston was for those Warriors, and that's a vital, crucial cog in a title team. At minimum, that's his floor. So I don't ever worry about LaMelo Ball developing. It's just what's he going to develop to and how long is that jump shot potentially going to hold him back into being one of the top 20 players in the league. That's about it.
Do you see him being, because he certainly has the size to do it, do you see him like turning into someone who's going to be super disruptive on defense, where I think you look at what Lonzo can do in New Orleans, where he can like positionally get you 3 spots worth of defense, really. And LaMelo, I think he's even bigger, if I'm not mistaken.
He is.
And the other question I had to that is, do you see him being how do you see him working off the ball, particularly if, the stroke isn't there? Like, do you trust him to be able to work off of Devonte Graham or even, to a lesser extent? Well, Gordon Hayward, of course, and then just another ball handler in general.
I honestly, disruptive on defense. That was the other thing, and thank you for bringing up defense. Defensively, he's not as bad as everybody seems to think he is. Everybody got, and this is something that I think people get kind of, and this is just a personal thing, but I think people kind of get enamored or use like certain clips against people to say, oh, he's not that interested in defense, this, that, and the third, and not recognizing that these are 17-year-old kids knowing they're going to be in the league.
Right.
This isn't one of those situations where you're having guys that are talking about, oh, I can't wait to get to the league. Again, I might get to the league. I got to work as hard as it's not a Grant Riller situation, unfortunately. And we'll get to Grant Riller. But I honestly do believe that he was bored because there are defensive instincts, stuff that he's doing off ball. Now, granted, on ball defense, he's got a long way to go. But off ball defense, the kid is a savant and he's doing stuff and he's helping delay actions. And he hasn't really gotten into the defensive scheme that James Borrego really wants to do just yet. I'm not going to say he can't be disruptive. I wouldn't expect it this year, I might not even expect it next year. But
yeah, I mean, rookies and sophomores are just historically, they don't have, most of them, overwhelmingly so, don't have positive impacts on defense.
No, exactly. But I see it. Like, there's tape where you see him flashing in on a mismatch, and there are things that he does that tells me that he gets it. I'm not sure he's going to be Lonzo, but I'm not sure that he's going to be LiAngelo bad on defense. That's what I would tell you.
LiAngelo bad is that's like, I don't even know, that should never have been considered his worst case outcome. Former Detroit Piston LiAngelo Ball.
Exactly, former Detroit Piston LiAngelo Ball. And again, I might as well curb that because I never know. LiAngelo might end up on the Greensboro Swarm for all I know.
So Grant Riller, which I'm obligated to ask about him because my co-host is obsessed with Grant Riller, but also because he ends up being just, from where he was projected, and I know this draft is all over the place, some people had him as like a late first-round prospect, early second round, and so the Hornets got him is kind of interesting. I'm curious if you've dug into his game at all, and what you might like or not like about him. I didn't really look at him at all before the draft, and I did some look at some of what he did in college before we did this podcast, and I feel like his shooting's just going to be all over the place. I think he could probably do, some, like, he can beat some guys with the ball in his hands, like if he's dribbling up in transition. He feels like he could be a slippery player when he's off the ball, but I also, this is me being a million miles away from the situation, I just don't really see like a path, at least this season, when you look at the personnel in Charlotte, to maybe him playing a ton of minutes or having a huge impact. And then I don't even know, I was trying to find out if anything about his knee injury. I couldn't dig up anything on that, and so I was curious too if whether that was considered like serious or just more of a precautionary thing that they were resting him for.
I would tell you that you can tell Adam that Grant Riller is going to be fine in Charlotte for the long term. I don't think they expected him to contribute this year. He's one of those guys that's similar to a Jalen McDaniels now, who's having a really good preseason right now. He's one of those guys, we're going to stick him in Greensboro. He's going to learn the system. He's going to learn how to be an NBA pro. And he's going to learn with a guy named Nick Friedman, who I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, who's their developmental coach and who has now turned around Devonte Graham, and you will understand the name of Jalen McDaniel this year. I think there are gonna be some guys, and I think Grant Riller, I liken him more to a Jeremy Lin, and I'm not talking about Linsanity Lin where he was just exploding everywhere and scoring on everybody, and then you had there will be no Riller mania. maybe from Adam, maybe that, but in terms of just in terms of what Riller can do, I think he's going to stick. I just don't think it'll be this year. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't worry about it. The knee injury is something that I didn't notice up until I saw the game, box score, the official box score from the Orlando game on Thursday. They've been really super quiet about that. So I don't know if it's serious. I don't know what it is. But at this point, I wouldn't worry about Grant Riller. I think he's going to be a player for the Charlotte Hornets. It's just not going to be this year, and that's completely okay for right now.
The other rookie on this roster that really intrigues me is Vernon Carey Jr. There were a few teams that were really high on him, and the Knicks specifically traded up with the intention of getting him, only to see Charlotte then take him. Watching him, do you have any impressions of his game? He feels like an oddity to me, like where he looks like a big and is built like a big, but he feels like he's like a below the rim wing. Am I just completely off base there?
You're not completely wrong. They gave him the Charlotte Hornets drafted him and then gave him the most guaranteed money of any second rounder this year. They did that with a purpose. It was a 4-year deal. I truly believe they see something in him. He's another guy that I would not be surprised if you don't see a single minute for him in this regular season. I would not be surprised if he goes to Greensboro, wherever the G League is, and gets a full year seasoning, and then he comes out next year. It's either him or Riller that comes out of the Greensboro system to be ready to be an NBA prospect. So I see what they see in him. I wonder if they're going to have to continue to work on his footwork on defense. His footwork on offense is awesome. and he's a face-up guy. And low-key, the EYBL, during the EYBL season, and the only reason I know this is because I was doing research on it, he gave Wiseman buckets. And you watch that tape, and it's like, okay, I see exactly what he was doing. Unfortunately, he was miscast at Duke as a big man. Stop me if you heard that before, by the way. But the other thing is just, I really do believe that he's going to be their guy. I understand why they picked him there. I personally wouldn't have, but they ended up getting Riller later in the draft, so I'm okay with it. I see what they were going for, and there's him, and then there's another guy, Nick Richards, who I think has got a longer way to go, but I see what they were trying to do. They were trying to get bigs in here for the future. They weren't meant to matter this year. They still have Cody Zeller. They still have Bismack Biyombo. And if LaMelo's going to make both those guys look good and get those guys paid because they're both essentially on one-year deals, then hey, kind of makes sense. So I'm here for what they're going to do in terms of big man development going forward. And as long as Vernon Carey just continues the path of what Greensboro has done for a lot of people, he should be just fine.
I think this will anger Adam. I like him a lot better than I like Grant Riller, and I think it's just because guys with size who have a floor game, like a face-up floor game on offense, those are just going to pique my attention more. I don't see it, and again, I'm probably shin deep. Like, that's as high as I went into Vernon Carey research, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert here. I don't know that I see it on defense, though. And we get caught up in positions, but I just don't know what's going to end up being best for him to defend. And I don't, like, you mentioned his footwork, and I look at him, he didn't seem quick enough to, like, keep up with, like, maybe these more explosive fours or anything. But then I'm like, well, is he going to be someone who kind of is able to even hold up against fives? Because, yeah, he kind of has the size to do that. So I really would worry about him there. But just looking at what he's able to do on offense, he's the one that interests me more of the non-LaMelo rookies that they have right now.
No, he does. He interests me as well. But the one thing that I do know, and this is something I got from a friend of mine that covers Duke up there, before the draft, he was working on his footwork defensively. Like, that was one of the points of emphasis, is that he got a trainer and started working on his footwork. Lost 30 pounds between the end of the college season and the draft. So I'm not worried about it, because if it's a nutrition thing and he's working on his defensive footwork, I think he can do just enough. I know that they're probably, whoever they were going to draft, and I think this is the other thing, whoever they were going to draft from a big man perspective, because I know that the Hornets were enamored. Like, they didn't expect LaMelo Ball to be there, but they wanted Wiseman. And if they had to pick between LaMelo and Wiseman, they would have picked Wiseman. I do believe that whoever they were going to draft big man-wise, if it was including James Wiseman, was going to have to be one of those guys that they were going to have to coach defensive footwork into, and to be better at defending the switch, because I know Borrego for a fact loves switching on every pick and roll and blitzing every pick and roll if they have to, and going from recovery. The big man part was always going to be a weakness. So I think working with a guy like Vernon Carey, you can teach a lot more and be a little bit more stricter than had you drafted a guy like James Wiseman to do that as well.
So, one, I feel like I deserve like a hypothetical fist bump for waiting a few minutes to ask you about Gordon Hayward. And
you
two,
do.
I'm going to clarify my stance before I throw it to you, because I was surprised at how much shit I caught for what I said about Gordon Hayward, like semi-immediately after his contract was signed. And I will say I appreciate that people listen to our Charlotte Hornets takes on this podcast. So shout out. And I am not like, even like the heated people in my DMs, like they were, I appreciate them caring enough to be that angry. And I honestly do. I don't have a problem with Gordon Hayward, the player, on the Hornets in timeline or the way he plays. I viewed it just as a mishandling of assets because you end up waiving and stretching Batum, who's now on your books for an additional 2 years, albeit at a smaller number. And I know cap space is not as important in Charlotte, and I wasn't under the guise that they were going to win 2021 free agency or anything like that. When you're overpaying a player relative to what his market was going to be, going that extra length of we are going to waive and stretch Nick Batum, that's where it went off the rails for me. I wouldn't have paid Gordon Hayward the money in a vacuum had they just flat out been able to do it at that moment in time. However, that's where it became verging on, if not absolutely indefensible, that decision-making there. So I was curious as to where you land on this.
I understand where you were coming from. I really, really, really understand where you were coming from when you had that take, and which is why you never heard from me on it, because I thought it was a fair take. And because I had that same, initially, I had that same reaction to it. Where I differ on this is, and this is something that sometimes we do from a national perspective, from a local perspective sometimes, is we don't seem to understand the human aspect of it, that you actually have to at least show that you're trying. And that's the big thing. Like, you got to remember that this team let Kemba Walker basically go for nothing. And
right.
or let them go or got Terry Rozier in return, who's also been better than advertised.
He had a really good year last season. I still the Kemba Walker stuff, and that was part of my Gordon Hayward take. Like, I'm never gonna defend that. But Terry Rozier had a really good season last year.
But you also have to show the young guys, the Miles Bridgeses, the Malik Monks, the guys that you want to keep, that you're actually trying. Because one thing I think we're forgetting is that no one wants to be a part of an experiment in a rebuild. No, especially when the CBA is what it is right now, where these players are probably giving up anywhere up to 10% escrow and probably not going to see that. So if you're going to lose money, you are going to want to go to a winning product. And the big thing that I think we all forgot is that the Charlotte Hornets have no credibility in the league, and they don't have any credibility within their own building with some of those players. And I think the Gordon Hayward thing was necessary to at least buy some credibility to say, hey, guys, hey, rest of the league, we are actually trying. We have to do this. Because when you have a Montrezl Harrell and you offer him legitimately, from what I heard, anywhere from 15 to 18 million a year, and he says, "Nah, I'm good. I'm just gonna go play for the Lakers." Like, when that happens, you got to do something. When Harry Giles goes and takes the league minimum with Portland instead of probably taking a $4 or $5 million deal with the Hornets, you have to do something, because no one thinks you're legitimate. And how much is legitimacy going to cost? In this case, it's $40 million a year to say, hey, guys, we're trying. We're not going to be the franchise that we used to be. And we're going to at least attempt to win and show that you can develop and win. And at the same time, buy relevance around the league, because there are going to be more games on TV because of, one, LaMelo, two, Gordon Hayward.
So how much legitimacy does Gordon Hayward add to that, though? And my other thing would be, as you mentioned, development. I think that might be like a bigger argument in their favor, like to prove that they can take, a Jalen McDaniels, like if they could fast forward, and that's not going to happen overnight. If you jump, ahead a year or two from now and Jalen McDaniels is even better, like and even Devonte Graham, like those should be more impactful success stories. So I don't view Gordon Hayward as the guy that says, oh, hey, we're trying. Like, I just don't view it in those terms. And I also would say, if you were going to try to send that message, it's probably more difficult to do after what happened with the Kemba Walker stuff, I would argue. I think people are going to remember that before they remember that you overpaid Gordon Hayward. And I think I know nationally, we always tend to over-romanticize rebuilds and say, well, they should just be as bad as possible. This kind of felt like the year to do that, because I don't think arenas are ever going to be full at any point during the season.
Agreed.
And Gordon Hayward's not putting butts in seats anyway. Like, maybe he'll put a few more, but I don't think he's that type of a draw. And so looking ahead of the 2021 class, it's like, why not just be bad this year, and then you can try and do something like this. I will acknowledge one of the counterpoints, and I'm sure you have many, would just be like, Gordon Hayward's not uplifting your team to the point where they're so good that they're falling out of contention of a top whatever pick. You want to say, like, I would say between 5 and 8. Like, I would still put them in that range, or at least odds-wise, because the lottery's wild now. So I recognize that, and if you're going to give, as long as you're giving LaMelo adequate influence over the offense, because he's a rookie, that's going to lend itself to being organically but entertainingly bad. So I understand I might be overhyping that aspect. This just did not feel like the summer to do what they did.
I would agree with you, but when you start going back through the press conferences, especially early in the season, Gordon Hayward was a target of this team regardless. So he was going to get overpaid. He was going to get that $30 million a year from the Hornets regardless. He was going to get it, and I agree that it's not gonna be very competitive. But at the same time, one, I don't think how popular that Gordon Hayward was going to be in this town, specifically Charlotte. He was going to move jerseys, and he was going to get guys out there. That's an indictment on whatever you want to say about Charlotte, and I understand what I'm saying about that. At the same time, I think the best possible scenario for the Hornets, and this is something I really do believe is going to happen, they get to the 10 seed, they get to the play-in tournament, and then they get knocked out, but they show that they've at least gotten to a national point. I really do think people needed to understand that this team is at least semi-serious. I don't think they're that good of a team, and also at the same time, you can't be outright bad. Cleveland's tried that for 2 years straight right now. And the highest pick they've gotten is what, 5? Like, at this point, it's better to be competitive and bad and then risk your life to the lottery gods than be outright bad and then end up picking 5th or 6th and not getting the star that you're actually looking for. So I understand that it's a bad draw, but at the same time, I think this team is figuring out that it's better to be competitive and bad than just outright bad. And I think that's how you game the system. And in other terms, I do believe that this new lottery system is going to influence guys that you can't be outright bad. It's not going to help you. So until you realize that you're competitive and bad, and I don't think the Knicks have learned that lesson yet, you're not going to be picking in the top 3.
So I never thought of it as a means of highlighting like the team in a way where it's, if there are more people who take the Hornets seriously because they're slightly better than they thought, that's a way to accentuate like the stuff that they've done in-house with their development. So that's super interesting to me. I will eat some crow too if they're going to be in the play-in. I just didn't expect that from them. So that would be something that if you get there, I don't know what the value necessarily is of that, but it would exceed my expectations. I don't know that anyone's going to ever talk me into this overall. And I think part of it might just be, I don't know what the final 2 years of this deal are going to look like. If the first 2 years they have a chance to be, I wouldn't say like Gordon Hayward will be worth it, but I'd be curious to see what the last 2 years look like, just given and I know some of them have been mostly like freak and unrelated injuries, but just the sheer number of injuries and setbacks that he's had over the past 3 years.
I don't think this deal ends well, but I don't think the Batum deal was going to end well. And I don't think I ever expected it. I expected him to be traded this year. I don't expect this to go. I don't think, like, when we go back and look at the history of these big contracts, how many of them have, quote unquote, ended well? Like, very few, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Like, none of these generally end well. They end up stretched or waived, or the best case scenario, a salary dump at the end of the year. They don't end amicably. So I don't know why we expect it in this case as well. So until, like, I guess where we're at with these big contracts is you're not really going to have these really great contracts that end well. And I don't think, like, I think I do agree with you that there's going to be those two guys, those first 2 years that are going to be awesome. The third year is going to be mild. And then the fourth year, if he does decently, then okay, that's great. And then he goes on his way back to Utah to retire or something like that. Or he re-ups here. He loves it here and he re-ups. I just don't think at this point with what he does, like, he's here to accelerate the growth curve of a Devonte Graham. He's going to be here to accelerate. He's going to be here to, I would say, accelerate the growth curve of a LaMelo Ball. He's going to do a lot of this stuff that helps a lot of the other younger guys and raises expectations for them in that locker room to say, hey, this is how we do this. This is how you do that. And not necessarily be the vocal leader, but be the quiet leader. Be the guy that they need that to show them how to work, how to expect, and how to win. And granted, Gordon's seen that only from a third banana, fourth banana standpoint for a decent part of it. But at the same time, I think that still matters to say, hey, I've been around winning organizations. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. And from a player standpoint, I do believe that experience is invaluable at times.
And that's where the one thing that I actually do like about it is he seems like the idea of him feels like a good fit for LaMelo, Devonte Graham, just other guys on this roster who might be handling the ball, because he's going to take pressure away from them. And the defense is at some point going to, if not right away, going to focus more on LaMelo, but Hayward's like that safety valve where, first of all, he was never a guy who put a ton of pressure on the rim, and he's like, in space, he's just not the same as he was before that first devastating leg injury, which is fine. But his in-between game is so good. He can hit, catch, and shoot threes. He's a good passer. And so I'm wondering if that, if you agree, like that sort of, I don't want to just boil it down to attention, but like having that other outlet on offense in the half court, if that ends up helping LaMelo Ball a great deal through, let's say the first 2 years of his career.
Oh, absolutely. It'll help him a lot. The one guy, I think it helps him, but I also think it helps a guy like Terry Rozier, who has familiarity with him. And I also think it helps a Devonte Graham, who, at the end of the day, is still the starting point guard for this team. I don't think LaMelo is going to start this year unless there's injury. I think with LaMelo, as much as we like him, I think we have to pump the brakes, because Devonte was playing at a close to an at least all-star level at the first half of last season. And granted, he exploded onto the scene, and then once teams started getting tape on him and started figuring how to slow him down, they got a little bit better at it. But I think Devonte Graham, when we have these conversations about LaMelo Ball necessarily exploding and starting, I would tell you to pump your brakes and tell you wait till March before we have a conversation about him legitimately taking over. I would also tell you that when we have these conversations about what Gordon Hayward does, Gordon Hayward's going to help a lot of guys out. I do believe Gordon Hayward, like the biggest beneficiary to me for him, might be P.J. Washington, who in a pick and pop game, pick and roll game, that's kind of hard to defend. And especially if you have a guy like Devonte Graham as a release valve to hit a deep three, which he did pretty well. Mm-hmm. So I would say Gordon Hayward helps. Just being that off-ball creator, he's actualized what Nick Batum was supposed to be for this team. And that's the best way I would tell you that, because I would expect 18-5 and shooting probably 40-37. If you got that from Gordon Hayward in the first year, I think you'll be okay.
Does the offseason that they have where you are adding Hayward, who can handle the ball, you draft LaMelo, obviously, you have Grant and Riller, does it say anything about the future of Devonte Graham is going to be a free agent, or even just Terry Rozier, who has 2 years left on his deal, or even just a Malik Monk? Because it does feel a little bit crowded sort of in that area, and Hayward's not in the backcourt, and maybe you can get some 3 minutes from LaMelo in certain spots, but it does kind of feel like at least one of those guys is going to end up being the odd man out in the short term. And I don't think it would be Devonte in a vacuum, but I'm curious if you would view the Hornets as considering he and LaMelo, is that a long-term foundation for them, or is there a chance, just given that Devonte Graham is going to get paid the next offseason, that he becomes a trade candidate or someone that they could even just let walk in free agency?
I've been trying to do the math on who gets left out for the better part of since basically LaMelo was drafted, because it feels like there's an odd man out. I don't believe it's Malik Monk, because I believe Mitch Kupchak when he says he's still one of the most talented guys on the roster. And I do believe they plan on figuring out what Malik Monk can be. I don't think it's Devonte Graham, because, again, Devonte Graham is probably the biggest shining example of what they've done with Greensboro in development. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's Terry Rozier, because I've made this joke and I kind of semi-believe this. James Borrego figured out what to do with Terry Rozier better than Brad Stevens has. And that's something that we don't talk about enough. I really do wonder at this point who's the odd guy out. My guess is, because the way he's looked thus far in preseason, Terry Rozier doesn't stay to the trade deadline. And that's not a fault of his own. I do believe that Terry Rozier has played really, really well. I just think that there's going to be a team that comes calling, maybe Milwaukee, I don't know, that's going to need that off-ball scoring that Terry Rozier brings, and just a guy that is just not afraid. And I do believe Terry Rozier is on his way out, but it'll be through no fault of his own. And I want to say this, I don't want to trade him. I really don't. But I think there's going to be a team that's going to offer a pick. And the fact that he's only on the books for a year and a half at 18, which is starting to seem like accurate value for the guy. I kind of, like I said, I kind of like him there. I kind of like him, but I don't think Terry Rozier is going to be here long term. And I think the Hornets will be poor for it. But they're going to need to open up those minutes.
Yeah, I'd say his money I would still peg on the higher end, but if he's going to hit 46% of his catch and shoot threes and just be super plug and play on the offensive end and give you some, a semblance of like really motor and activity on defense, I would think that, I don't know how big of a commodity he becomes at the trade deadline, but I would think I don't even know that I would predict that he would get moved. I'm actually surprised that he would be your pick. I really honestly thought it would be Monk or even Graham before then, just because maybe they were nervous about the money he's going to command in free agency, having been the team that overpaid Gordon Hayward. There's going to be more teams with money next season, so it only takes one team mantra is more like, well, there might be 3 teams that are willing to pay him that type of deal. So that's interesting that you think it'll be Rozier. I would agree with you that his money is not like the detriment it was painted as by any stretch at the time of the Kemba Walker sign and trade.
Here's the thing, Dan. Here's a question I would actually ask you. Would you rather have Rozier at 18 or Rubio at 13?
I would rather have Rubio at 13. Just looking at, I think with his playmaking and what he does for defense, but I get the shooting aspect is tough. Like that's it. I would have to think about it for more than the half second that I gave you there.
Like that's the thing. That's what, because I really do believe that was the option. And I think when we talked about this initially, like the names that were brought up that I had heard were literally Emmanuel Mudiay. That was the guy that was supposed to be the Kemba replacement, and to end up with a guy like Terry Rozier instead. You did kind of well. Mitch Kupchak has done magic. Mitch Kupchak, outside of the Gordon Hayward thing, which was clearly a Michael thing, has managed to keep Michael at bay. So that matters. That matters to keep your ownership group away from the checkbook when it comes to free agent time. That stuff matters. Go ask the Knicks. And I hate to clown on the Knicks, but the Knicks are clearly one of the teams that does this a lot. Like, if your GM can keep the ownership group out of the way as much as possible, then that matters. I mean, and granted, that could go the other way, because look at Sacramento. Sacramento, again, Vivek Ranadive has stayed away, but unfortunately, he hired Vlade, who did what he did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's got to be that balance. And so far, I'm not saying the Hornets have that balance, but I'm saying it's headed that. I really do believe it's headed that way right now. And considering that the Knicks can make me look stupid in public, I'm not the Knicks, but the Hornets can make me look stupid in public on this move. I like the way they're going. I don't think it'll be Devonte, because I think if they send Devonte packing, remember how we talk about messages to the locker room? I think that also sends a bad message to the locker room.
Yes, let's give Gordon Hayward all this money and then someone who's just more homegrown. Peace out.
Yeah. Like, I don't think you can do that and not have that come back and bite you. And I know that for a fact there were really sour feelings about how the Kemba Walker departure happened. We've had Mama Walker talk about this publicly, about how bad this ended. So I do think that Devonte, they're going to have to pay a guy, and I do think it's going to end up being, I do kind of believe it's going to end up being Devonte, and we'll see when it comes to Miles, because Miles is, I think, like extension eligible starting next year. So that matters too.
But to your Miles Bridges point, he's Someone who, for some reason, I believe has always been in the league 1 year longer than he's actually been in the league. I had him on like my extension eligible list for this upcoming offseason, only to then realize that he's only been in the league for 2 years. What are your expectations for him this season? It does seem like he's going to play more 4, unless I'm wrong there, and that's definitely better suited for him. I think he's, when you look at if for those power drives that he could do, he feels like more of a mismatch there. But how do you like that defensively? What do you kind of just view for him and his role on this team moving forward?
I honestly see him as like this offseason, this preseason has shown me that this guy is a power forward. Like, he's done all the dirty work, and he's never really done all the dirty work, like taking charges. Basically, he doesn't have to guard the best player on offense anymore. And I think he's realizing his role. Now, granted, P.J. Washington has been better, and they're going to try this small ball lineup that I absolutely loathe, which is P.J. Washington, Miles Bridges, Hayward, Rozier, and Devonte Graham. They're going to score a whole bunch of points. They're also going to give up a whole bunch of points as well. I worry about that. I worry about that kind of matchup and everything else like that. But I am one of those guys that believes that Miles Bridges has a future on this roster. I do worry that PJ is kind of in the way, but from what we've seen thus far, he's become a much better defender, much better team defender. He's getting to hit more than the just left corner 3. And I think he's going to be a guy that you're going to say, I'm not going to say he's going to be MIP, but I wouldn't be surprised if he got MIP consideration, because I do think him and LaMelo, I think LaMelo's going to unlock something in Miles Bridges this year, and that's where this really gets interesting going forward for him.
You kind of already touched on this, but what are your thoughts, concerns, general impressions of, the PJ Washington at the 5 lineups? Do you see any sort of path to those groups working on defense? Though they got annihilated in the, it was a small sample size last year that he was playing center, and the rebounding was terrible. Does that at least get any easier, that now if you have a healthy Hayward, if you have, LaMelo's a good rebounder for his position, or you kind of already hinted at, like, you're not the biggest fan of those lineups in general?
I'm not, because I still think that rebounding matters. And people have told me rebounding doesn't matter nearly as much as you think. It only costs you so many more points. But if you can score on offense, then it negates it. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because if you're giving up consistent rebounds twice, 3 times a game, where that it's like you give up that demoralizing offensive rebound, that matters. And especially with a team that's confidence, for all intents and purposes right now, is kind of fragile. So I don't think it's a good idea. I'm not the biggest fan of it. Maybe they convince me of it, but from what I've seen and from what the numbers have seen, I'm not the biggest fan. And the biggest indictment of this, and maybe PJ Washington's rebounding, I remember watching him get boxed out by 5'9" Isaiah Thomas. And I love Isaiah Thomas. But when Isaiah Thomas beat you to a board, like, that's something that I can't necessarily forgive or forget. Dan, you understand where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, there's an element of unforgivable embarrassment of getting boxed out by someone who's 5'9".
Yeah, like, I can't do it. Like, you're supposed to be the big man. You're supposed to grab the board, and then you get boxed out by IT. No, but that can't happen, man. That can't. And unfortunately for him, like, that's the indelible mark. And he's the guy. If you were gonna ask me who's the guy that possibly takes a step back but tries more things, like whose efficiency takes a dip, it's PJ Washington, because he's got entirely too much on his plate. And unfortunately, I don't think the backups, I don't think the help that's going to come to maybe force him back into the 4 spot is coming anytime soon. And unfortunately, when we start talking about people that get squeezed out, there's going to be a legitimate discussion. I'm not sure if it's going to be this year or next year, where you're going to have to make a decision. Do you keep Miles or do you keep PJ? Do you keep Miles or do you keep PJ? And at some point, they're going to have to make that decision. And I don't know how you make that decision, especially if Miles takes off.
And you don't see, like, kind of having Hayward and even LaMelo there is streamlining PJ's offensive role even further, just because he seemed like such a comfy fit for them last year. It was a lot more plug and play than I thought he was going to be. And again, I'm not like super into college basketball, so take that impression with a grain of salt. And then even just like kind of the finesse he kind of had with the ball in his hands too. It felt like he would be the one that they'd be higher on in the aggregate than even Miles Bridges.
The one aspect where you do worry about is that when PJ Washington has to put the ball on the deck, that's where it gets kind of dicey for him, where that's where Miles has the advantage. As a small ball forward, Miles can put the ball on the deck and play make. He's done it before. He's done it consistently in preseason this year. I like what he does off the that's the only aspect where I could say Miles has a clear advantage. If PJ does that, then hey, we have a whole different type of stew that we're cooking here. But until he does that, that's probably the one aspect where Miles has an advantage. Or a guy like Jalen McDaniels, who can play the 3 and the 4, has an advantage. Like, those are the type of plays that he's missing from his game right now. And if he gets those, and granted, you're gonna have to be willing to suffer through a lot of turnovers to get to that point where he's more comfortable putting the ball on the deck. But if he gets there, I'm not gonna say he's a all NBA talent, but he's one of the better 4 or 5s in the league if he can put the ball on the deck and play make a little bit better.
Is there room for Cody Martin, Caleb Martin, and Jalen McDaniels all in the rotation? And if not, who would be the odd man out? I think I can safely say it won't be Jalen McDaniels, looking at all he projects to do for them. But is there room for all 3 of them to get minutes on this team?
No, there isn't. I don't believe. And this is where it gets interesting because I think Cody Martin is a rotation guy on this team. I believe Jalen McDaniel is a rotation guy on this team. I don't see a way for Caleb Martin to make significant headway, especially over a guy like Malik Monk, who can do a few more things a little bit better. Caleb Martin feels like trade filler. And I don't know, and I hate to say it that way, but he feels like trade filler because if you've paid attention to the Mitch Kupchak era, he's never really made an in-season trade. This year, with 14 guys on the active roster, an intentionally left open spot and $4 million, this year feels like the year where they make that in-season trade. What it's for, I don't know. But I do not
Julius
believe...
Randle is what you're getting at, isn't it?
I hope not.
I was just kidding there.
I hope not.
I got to start throwing that into the into the ether because something's going to happen to the Knicks. They already ended up with Obi Toppin instead of Tyrese Halliburton, and now I'm trolling you with Julius Randle. They're probably going to end up trading.
Dan, you see, this is your fault. You were hoping Halliburton was going to drop to you, and you talked to me about Obi Toppin all this time, and then here you go, and then they pick Obi Toppin over Tyrese Halliburton, which didn't make a lick of sense, and now you're starting Emmanuel Quickly at the point guard spot.
I will say Emmanuel Quickly looks really good. But yes, Halliburton is like, I will die for Tyrese Halliburton. So I was very disappointed.
Yeah, and I mean, you have old friend Michael Kidd-Gilchrist up there, who's getting a roster spot clearly. I mean, I don't know. When it comes to just this team, there are a lot of guys, and we've already talked about, especially the guard depth on this team. There are a lot of guys that need homes and need consistent minutes. Malik Monk is one among them. Caleb Martin, who I think is an NBA player, is among them. But right now, the way this team is built, the strength is at the guards. You have guys that can be and are, I would call them rotational pieces on championship teams. I do believe that about Devonte Graham, even if I'm not certain. He is his best role is as a starting point guard for a championship team. I think he's going to be really, really good. I do worry about, again, Terry Rozier has had a great season in Charlotte, and he figures to have another good one because he's come into this short preseason guns ablazing and looks super efficient while doing so. Again, LaMelo's going to get minutes because he's the number 3 pick, and he's just uber special right now. Cody Martin brings something different because Cody Martin defends and can hit threes now at a decent clip. I'm not saying a great clip. I'm saying decent. If you give him an open 3, he will hit it right now. That's something that you couldn't say about him last year. Jalen McDaniel gives you something different because he's 6'10", and he can guard 3, 4, and maybe a little bit of 5, depending on who the 5 is. He's a guy that hits threes. When we start talking about folks that aren't going to be as good, and the guy that you worry about is Caleb Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And that when it comes to that, he's just a little bit and the thing is, you have to make the decision between him or Malik Monk of who's going to get the remaining minutes. And for right now, I would take Malik Monk. It's close. It's closer than I'd like to admit, but I would take Malik Monk.
Looking at Malik Monk and let's say Cody Martin and Jalen McDaniels, I think I'm most intrigued by McDaniels long term. Is that accurate? Yeah, I think I might have been at Cody towards the end of last season just because I felt like his game was more well-rounded, but the 3-point shot from McDaniels feels real, and there's always like a play or 3 of the games that I've seen in Charlotte where he just does something where it's like, you know what, PJ Washington wouldn't have gotten that offensive rebound or just anything along those lines. And as you mentioned, the 3-point shot, and I think that's real. Like that seems pretty clearly just the way he's taking them, and even some of the preseason stuff that I watched of him, it's just like it feels so fluid now. And so if you're able to just buy into that, it feels like he should probably be the most tantalizing player long term.
Of the 3, if you told me I had to buy stock on Jalen McDaniel, Cody Martin, and Malik Monk, it's Jalen McDaniel, and I would be surprised to say that. I think Cody Martin is, I don't want to call him Travion Graham, because Travion Graham's done really, really well for himself in this league despite being undrafted. I really, 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 really like Jalen McDaniels' game because he's 6'10", and he shoots threes and he defends decently. He has brain lapses at times on defense, but those can be ironed out with more playing time and film. Jalen McDaniels actualized, and we're talking about a guy that fully gets it, is a guy that plays in this league for at least a decade, if not a little bit longer, because 6'10", shoots threes and defends. Those guys get paid no matter what. They generally get paid a lot of money down the line. So if you're going to tell me buying into the future, it's Jalen McDaniels, and it's not close. To make this clear, and I always come from this point, I am super pro players getting paid, but Charlotte has the way they've structured the contracts of every single one of these guys put themselves in a position where they don't have to choose right away if they don't want to. Just because Jalen McDaniels he's under team control if they want for 3 more seasons, including this one, and they have 2 seasons of both Cody and Caleb Martin, and then they kind of, they did that same thing. It's guaranteed money, but it's such small money, but you look at like Vernon Carey Jr., 4 years of just straight team control if they want it. So I will say that from a team perspective, I want players to get paid. I'll make that clear. From a team perspective, though, they've given themselves like just a ton of optionality and potentially like bargain bin deals to offset that albatross right now at the top of the roster. And that's the thing. I'm not sure it's an albatross because, like I'll continue to say, I don't think this ends with Hayward in Charlotte. I don't believe that. I do believe that. I think the 3 years where you're paying that extra $10 million because of you wanted to get rid of Nick Batum's contract, I think those 3 years are going to be on the books. And if that's the case, and that's just one bad year, then you're looking at 1 year. Like I said, I don't think that the Hayward contract is going to be as bad as people think, because I don't think they're going to be as big of a player next year for guys. And if they do acquire somebody, that may be the year they acquire someone via trade, because I don't think that. And also, we're talking about this like this team couldn't go to the playing game, get rocked, come out and end up with a top 3 to 5 pick because of it.
I made this joke with someone I was talking to off air when we were recording a podcast that the funniest outcome of all this is Hayward having a really good season and then Charlotte sending him to Indiana for the package that the Celtics turned down, where it was basically McDermott, Turner, and a first-round pick. I said that would be the most hysterical outcome of this entire thing.
I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening, though. I legitimately would not be surprised if that ends up happening, because that's the kind of thing that would happen. And I know the Miles Turner isn't that good, has gone around social media, but if you told me that we ended up with Miles Turner and another guy that can space the floor and put PJ in his proper position, and then solidly put Miles Bridges as your super sub 6th man of the year. I like that team, especially when it adds a Cody Martin who then starts and then lets LaMelo get more time. And you have a top 7 of Devonte Graham, Terry Rozier, Terry Rozier, Cody Martin, PJ Washington, Miles Turner, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges. I like that 7 going forward. At least and not necessarily as a competitive, they're going to make the playoffs, but as a competitive, let's do this and let's be a top 10 seed in the East and go play the playing game and get people excited about this team for the first time in a long time.
You bring up a fantastic point. The Miles Turner discourse has gotten out of control, and I don't ever want to oversimplify things, but it feels like unlocking him is really just a matter of where he's standing and volume, where it's like, hey, don't dribble inside the arc and take a long 2, or don't hover in long 2 range where you don't have the ball, and just fire away from 3. And I think Nate Bjorkgren might bring that out in him, but that's an odd aside. I did mean to ask you this. The fractured finger on Hayward's shooting hand, is there any impression of like how serious that is? Is it just going to be a pain tolerance thing where they don't expect him to miss too much time to start the year? Will he miss any time?
I don't expect him to miss time. I expect him to play on the 23rd, quite honestly. Opening game against Cleveland, I'd expect him to play. I think the one thing is I would watch his shooting numbers. Because it's a fractured pinky on his shooting hand. I would watch his shooting numbers, but outside of that, I think he's going to play.
You kind of already mentioned that you expect Terry Rozier to be gone by the deadline. Is there an element of that with it can't be the same element, but Cody Zeller's in a contract year. Their center position kind of dictates that they need him, but just because he's in a contract year, if he's healthy, I feel like he's a name that's going to pop up in a lot of midseason scenarios.
I'm glad I have this I'm glad I have your platform to say this right now. But I need people to understand that Cody Zeller is not going to be a buyout candidate. He's a trade candidate at best. And if they don't trade him, they're probably going to keep him and sign him to a more market-appropriate deal. I just don't see any of the centers being bought out unless Vernon Carey makes steps. I don't see Cody Zeller being traded unless a guy like Vernon Carey or Nick Richards makes a step towards it, or the small lineup actually dictates that, hey, we might have to go with this lineup a little bit more for right now. I don't see it right now because Biz, and I said this on Locked On Hornets the other day, Biz and Cody right now are necessary quote-unquote evils. Like, you have to have them there because, unfortunately, that you need defense and rebounding. And the one thing that Cody Zeller and Bismack Beyond both give you right now are defense and rebounding. So until that no longer becomes the case and someone else on the roster can do that, or they can add someone that can do that on the roster, this is not going to be a situation where you can necessarily deal a Cody Zeller unless you're not trying to win anymore. And if you're not trying to win anymore, that contradicts exactly what you've been doing since the beginning of this offseason. So that's why I don't see it happening unless Cody comes to the team, asks for a buyout. And even then, I don't see that happening. That's how much I really do believe he's either going to be on this team, or if they trade him, is because someone else has come up and developed in a way that we didn't expect.
I didn't even know that people were identifying him as a potential buyout candidate. That would be, even if he went and asked the team for it, that would just be, seems like that's too valuable to just to take, get a few dollars back and just let him go sign with another team. I know his salary is, first of all, it's not astronomical, but I know people don't want to pay bigs $15 million a year. But that still feels, even if it's a situation where they're running counter to what they wanted to do and they're moving him for worse money long term because it's attached to an asset, that would still be an option. And so I didn't even know that was being floated around, that Cody Zeller would become a buyout candidate.
I've seen rumblings about it, and I'm just I sit back and I laugh because I know it's not happening.
So what do you think ends up being, in a situation, close game, they're trying to win, what ends up being the best or most used closing unit for this squad? All
right, let's see. Graham, Rozier, Hayward, and then it's a combination of, and this is, I think there's going to be a closing offense and a closing defensive lineup. And I do think it's going to be among these 6 guys. It's going to be Rozier, Graham, Hayward, probably Washington, Bridges, Zeller, and some combination. And the last 3, Washington, Bridges, Zeller, are going to be a combination of offense, defense, who's got it working what night. That's going to be your closing lineup. I don't see LaMelo closing games yet because you do not trust I don't trust the jump shot to be consistent just yet. But I do think that that's going to be your 6, and I think the 7th is LaMelo, and that depends on how much they choose to want. They want to open up everything in terms of, okay, everybody's actualized, everybody's a threat. LaMelo's going to find the open guy and then possibly bury you. So I think it's those guys. I hate to say that I'm pumping the brake, telling people pump the brakes on LaMelo. He's not ready yet, because these are the type of things that I end up being generally very, very wrong about. But I want people to understand he can be the rookie of the year, and he doesn't have to close games just yet. It's coming, but I don't think it's there just yet.
Is there like a less obvious or quirkier lineup you're hoping they try out at any point this season?
Rozier, LaMelo, McDaniels, Bridges, Zeller.
Okay.
I like that lineup because I think that's going to have much more three-point shooting. You're going to have a lot more. You have guys that can attack the rim, and I think that kind of lineup, when you play Rozier off ball, is the type of lineup that spreads the floor just enough for LaMelo to really do damage and gives him a really good pick, two really good pick and roll players that can finish at the rim. Well, one finishes at the rim, but one is a really good pick and roll big in Cody Zeller. I kind of want to see that one.
Would they consider doing McDaniels, Bridges, Hayward, Graham, and then either Rozier or Ball?
No, because I think it still runs into the same problems that you do with PJ. Is that I don't think McDaniels is big enough to be a center yet. It's close. I think that's a year or two away. I think that's another year of an NBA strength training program, and I think that's a little bit further away than we think. And unfortunately, I don't see Miles Bridges as a small ball center anytime soon, and I don't think the organization does either.
Yeah, it would have to fall to McDaniels there, and so if you don't think that he's ready for that, could it be any worse than using PJ Washington at center though?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because where I think that small ball lineup where PJ Washington grabs every third rebound, the chances of that happening with McDaniels goes to every fifth rebound. So if you're giving up 4 offensive rebounds per possession, that's a bad number, no matter what.
Okay, so what are some realistic expectations for this team this season? Win total, where they finish in the East. Just as a note, their over/under is currently at 27.5. Last time I checked, which is the equivalent for people who cannot think in terms of 72 games, like myself. Is the equivalent of a 31 win season. How would you lean on that number?
Had it been 25, 26, I would probably give them the over. I do wonder, the thing that I worry about with this team particularly is that 9-month layoff and only having 2 weeks of organized basketball activity in 9 months, and then coming into a season and then going against the Raptors and looking extremely, extremely, extremely rusty, and seeing the difference in communication on defense especially, that matters. So I expect them, as they're integrating new parts, that they're going to start slow. I can see this being a second half of the schedule team. I can also see this team, I can see, like I said, I see this team starting off slow and then basically being a house of fire come that second half of the schedule. I would say under, but I'm clenching my fists, nervous about how much I say the under. because I can easily see this team being a top 10 team. And I can easily see this team catching teams like Indiana or Atlanta, Washington even too, just sleeping and being a team that's like, hey, did you know the Hornets are in 9th? Oh, wow. I didn't really understand. I didn't really get that. But and just catching people sleeping. I can see this team being that, but I also can see this team having a lot of young guys, especially a lot of guys with like 3 years or less of surface time, and this being a very, very, very slow process.
I went under as well. I was probably more confident than you are. I just can't, and part of the reason was I can't figure out what they're going to be defensively. Like, I can talk myself into them being a sleeper defensive team, but I could also talk myself into them being absolutely awful on that side of the floor.
No. Defensively, I don't trust them. I do not trust them at all. I do not trust them at all when it comes to as a defensive team. I think this team is going to beat a lot of teams on offense. I think as LaMelo grows, I think he's going to help them score a lot more points and make things a lot easier. And I do think he rebounds his position exceptionally well for his size. So I do see a lot of that in there. I do I say under. I'm not very confident in it because I think they're just going to score points in bunches at times, and then they'll go cold and they'll continue to score points in bunches. And it's going to be a team that competes every night. And with a 72 game season and the depth that they have, I think there's going to be a lot of different combinations to make sure that things stay fresh. And if you're a team that's tired and relies on a lot of veterans, they're going to catch you. And that's why I think if it's going to be under, it's going to be close.
Is there anything I have not asked you about that you would like to discuss about this Hornets team?
I'm surprised you didn't go. Do you think that LaMelo is going to be the Rookie of the Year this year? I am surprised that you did not ask me about that. I do, but and the thing is, like, in terms of LaMelo, I think he's going to be great. I think that he's, again, along with the rest of this team being a second half team, I do kind of wonder if this team, if a good second half of the schedule campaign is going to be strong enough, especially with this rookie class that no one seems to really love like that, if that's going to be enough to carry him to Rookie of the Year. I do think he's going to be Rookie of the Year. And as I will continually say, stop underrating Terry Rozier. and I think that's the thing. Terry Rozier has been really, really good for this team, and I think he's shown to be a really clutch player, and he's shown to be a very, very, very good player outside of the Brad Stevens Boston guard system. So I would just point out that the Terry Rozier hype train is real, and I can see him. Like I said, I like him. I want to see him in Charlotte. I can see him get dealt at the same time.
LaMelo's Rookie of the Year stock feels almost implicit. I guess if they bring him along more slowly than you'd expect, but he does seem, especially of the top rookies, that he should be guaranteed the most volume and influence over an offense. I have steadily talked myself into going with Tyrese Halliburton for Rookie of the Year, though.
Wait. Hold on. Dan, you're trusting the Sacramento Kings to do something right?
Look, fair. But I feel like Tyrese Halliburton is one of those players that is going to end up being so good that the team can't even screw him up. And I think what's also encouraging by the Kings is this feels like it looks like they're going to be committed to stripping it down, and so that his role is only going to grow, augment as the season goes on. And I even think they're going to be willing to try Buddy, Fox, and Halliburton at the same time. And he's one of the rookies that I identify as, I won't say positive, but you'll look at him on defense and say, whoa, like he's kind of ahead of the curve of where he should be. I don't know that I would definitely bet against what LaMelo's volume is going to be on offense. Like I said, it feels like hitting LaMelo's Rookie of the Year victory is almost implied by volume, and that's not to demean him. It seems like he's going to be really good. I just don't. I can't quit Halliburton, as I keep saying on this podcast.
No, you can't. If you can't quit Halliburton, like, I'll give you a name that I just continually come back to because I'm surprised about how good he is, despite the fact that he's had a whole bunch of international experience. I keep coming back to Maledon. Out in OKC. Like, that's the guy that if you're telling me it's not going to be LaMelo, it's going to be someone like Theo Maledon, who's going to have a whole bunch of opportunities thanks to Gilgeous-Alexander and Al Horford, and just basically he's going to end up showing out. And Sam Presti's going to make us all look bad yet again. And that's without the millions of first-round picks that he's got.
Yeah, they have a ton of like guards, so I don't know how the rotation is going to shake out, but if they're going to try and like really plumb the depths of how bad they could be, like why not just give him like some offensive license? So that is not someone I considered. But when I was doing the Thunder podcast, like one of the players that was identified as like, oh, sleeper could be really good for this team, by Olivia Punchal, who I was talking to, was Teo Maladone. And so I'm interested to see what kind of like role he ends up playing for them. But that's an interesting pick from you. I like it.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't just focus on the Hornets. I'm a secret league pass addict. I know there are meetings for this. I choose not to go. But
is it really a secret that you're a league pass addict? I feel like if anyone follows you on Twitter, they could tell.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. You make a very, very good point. But like Maladone, the other thing is I secretly really love this rookie class. I think it was unfairly panned. I think people studied entirely too long on this draft.
Yeah.
through no fault of their own, because we waited almost 6 months in between where the draft actually happens and so I understand completely. At the same time, I think this draft class is going to be better than people think. And I also think that the stars, there are going to be serious stars. I hope LaMelo is one of them, but I can see a scenario where this draft ends up giving you a couple of all NBA guys, and it's going to be like, can you remember when everyone was crapping on this draft? Because I do. And that'll be one of the things. I think this draft is better than people think. I think it's deeper than people think. And when we have these conversations about one of the better draft classes, I don't think this is going to be like where we talk about the Giannis, CJ McCollum draft, where no one was good in the top 10 picks, really. But I do think that this is a draft class that people are going to come back and say, hey, that was deeper than we thought it was.
Yeah, I think that everyone just got caught up, and it didn't feel like there was a ton of superstar prospects at the top, but it feels like there's very clear, even some of the players that I'm not super high on, it feels like there's a very clear path to them sticking in the NBA for a very long time.
Yeah, there are a lot of NBA prospects on this team, and I really do love them. I really do love this class. I really do. I just hope Vernon Carey pans out, because if not, and you could have had Isaiah Joe and added another shooter to this roster, I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to be happy.
Konata, thank you so much. This was great. Always love picking your brain about the Charlotte Hornets and hoops at large. If you guys are not following Konata on Twitter, what are you even doing at this point? Follow him immediately. He's at Nata the Scribe. That's at NATATHESCRIBE. He is co-host of the Locked On Hornets podcast and a writer for Dime Up Rocks. Again, follow him on Twitter at Nata the Scribe. As always, Konata, this was fantastic, and I think you know by now that I will definitely be pestering you again down the line.
Man, look, again, I like talking ball about you, and now that you can no longer troll me about Obi Toppin, yeah, we can have more conversations now. We can absolutely have more conversations.
All I could say is that was the single worst possible outcome, was not only the Hornets not ending up with Toppin, but the Knicks ending up with Toppin.
That was the best part. Because you know what? And I didn't even think about it until it happened oh, wait, this is Dan's worst nightmare.
Right, and you know what was even worse about it? So I got like super sick around the draft to the point that I actually had to call out of Bleacher Report that night, and luckily they were very nice about it, but I couldn't move. Like, that's how sick I was. And so I missed the first part of the draft, and so I woke up to find out that they took like Toppin. I had passed out. And so it wasn't even like, I wasn't even watching it live. I just woke up, and that was like the first thing that jumped out was that they had Toppin. And I was like, oh. And look, he might be fine. But the fact that I had, one, trolled you about him, and two, fallen in love with Halliburton, and then Devin Vassell was the other guy where I thought people might have led a mutiny if he was taken in that spot. But I think he's going to be one of the guys who's really good out of this class. So it was just a perfect storm of karmic retribution, I think, for me trolling you for so long about Toppin.
Yes, it was. It was perfect karmic retribution. Perfect. And you know what? The universe saved you that day. Because had you seen that live, being as sick as it was, the shock might have killed you.
And look, the other thing is the Hornets are the reason they don't have Vernon Carey Jr. either, who's like sort of intriguing. And so that's like, just too many doses of me being given mine on draft night, apparently. But
double whammies.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Konata. I will talk to you soon. This was great, as always. Really appreciate the time.
Absolutely, man. Talk to you soon.